Thanks for tuning in to the Abiding Presence podcast with Gary Funk. You can reach Gary at theupperroomfamily@gmail.com.
Well, hello everyone. I'm so glad that you could join me here today on the Abiding Presence podcast. And I hope that you're ready to dive into a life-giving and a thought-provoking conversation with me as we discuss the whole issue of divorce, remarriage, and the grace of God. And as you know, this topic raises all kinds of questions and it arouses all kinds of emotions for a lot of people. And so I want to deal with many of these questions, and I want us to be able to discuss this sensitive topic without our emotions getting in the way of what it is that we're really trying to communicate. Now, don't get me wrong. It's okay to have emotional responses when we're talking about something this deep and this personal, okay? But it's not okay for our emotions to hijack these types of conversations, and that's what often happens. And my experience has been that when we deal with some of our big questions surrounding divorce, remarriage, and the grace of God, a lot of our emotional responses kind of get realigned, and we really do land in a healthier place emotionally. It's often the fear, the uncertainty, the confusion, and especially the religious anxiety behind our unasked questions that drive our emotions. And since I'm wanting to approach this topic from the perspective of a follower of Jesus, this adds a whole new layer of questions, doesn't it? We might ask things like, what does God think of all this? What conclusions can we draw from the Bible on this matter? And what do you do with your thoughts and feelings when someone in your own faith community disagrees with your understanding of this topic? And how does the grace of God fit into this messy reality anyways? And you know, my goal is not to tell you what to think on any of these matters or to tell you what to do, but rather to help you to come to your own conclusions by soaking in a long, slow discussion and by processing a few ideas that you may never have considered before. This is not going to be some quick microwave question and answer session here, my friends. This is a slow cooker journey designed for deep thinkers. And so, in order to accomplish this goal, we have to move slowly. And even after hearing all of this once, you will probably want to continue the conversation with other people in your life to take it even deeper. Every conversation you have will deepen your understanding, shape your emotions, and connect some more dots in your thinking. And eventually, you will find yourself coming to a place of having more confident convictions about how to best apply God's truth to your own journey. And then you can move forward with a fresh confidence that it is God's peace that is indeed guiding you. You know, I recently had a conversation with a middle-aged man who was very distressed over his recent separation from his wife. And although he wanted his life to honor the Lord, he struggled with a lot of confusion and with knowing how to move forward from where he was. And by some strange turn of events, he found some life and encouragement and some clarity in this podcast series that you're listening to right now. And after he had processed this whole series by himself, he connected with another older man who had also experienced a divorce some years earlier, and they listened to this whole series together, and they had discussions after every episode, just like friends do over coffee. And you know, that's exactly what this series is for, to spark new and deeper conversations in a way that doesn't tell you what to think or to do, because telling anyone how to think is not my job, it's not how I want to come across, and it's not even one of my goals. And speaking of goals, let me tell you about one of my goals. I want to infuse your situation with a hope like never before. Now, when you hear me use the word hope, I'm not talking about some kind of, wishful thinking or something like that. When I speak of hope, I'm referring to a joyful anticipation of good that is coming your way. That's what I mean by hope. You might even want to write that one down. A joyful anticipation of good that is coming your way. So as you slowly chew your way through this series, monitor your own heart to see if this kind of hope is starting to come alive inside of you. You know, Isaiah 40 verse 31 tells us that those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. Or you might say, those who live with a joyful anticipation of God's goodness will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not be faint. And this, my friend, is my prayer for you, that you will find the strength to walk, to run, and yes, eventually even to soar on the difficult journey that may lie before you. So here's how this whole series is laid out. The first 2 episodes are introductory sessions where I will simply set the table to prepare us for how to have this conversation in a safe and a productive way. In episode 3, we will look at divorce and remarriage in the Old Testament. And in episodes 4, 5, and 6, we'll take a long look at Jesus' teachings on this topic. In episode 7, we will deal with the big idea of covenants in the Bible and how that all ties into marriage. And in episodes 8 and 9, these are going to be very practical episodes, and there we will discuss some ideas about, how we might consider applying everything that we've discussed since the very beginning. So before we get started, let me introduce myself to you a little further. My name is Gary Funk. I live in Canada, and I was born in 1972. I've been married to my amazing wife since 1995, and we have 4 grown children who are at this point having a lot of fun figuring out their own paths in life. So after high school, I went on to Bible college for 1 year, and then I went on to university to get a science degree in pharmacy. So I'm not a preacher or anything like that. I'm just your brother in Christ who wants to encourage you, okay? I seem to have an unstoppable passion for inspiring people to discover the goodness of God for themselves, and I really do thrive on having conversations that matter with people who care. And so I want to spend the rest of my life living from this place of abiding presence, and I want to invite other people to discover a life with the Lord that is tender and that's safe and that's fulfilling and life-giving as well. And speaking of abiding presence, I want to make a few comments on the name of this podcast. The term abiding presence is a very meaningful one for me. It really captures best how I would describe what's been going on inside my heart for the last, 5 or 10 years. There really is a presence that overshadows us all. And if we recognize the goodness and the favor that awaits us in the shadow of the Almighty, and if we allow our hearts to be drawn into that presence, our lives are changed forever. And I want the presence of the Lord to overshadow and to inform every area of my own life. And I want the Lord to prepare me to better reflect that presence to others so that they also are drawn to a goodness in the Lord that they have possibly never really known for themselves. And many people understand the presence of the Lord as this place that you go to, right? Or as a feeling that you get in certain times and certain places. But that's not what I'm talking about here. For me, abiding presence is an awareness of the favor of God or an awareness of God's delight in me as His child that just follows me throughout my day. So even though there are times where I cultivate this relationship more intentionally through any given week, this presence is not some place that I go to. It's someone that's leading me throughout my day. Abiding presence is much more the place that I live from than anything that I say or do. And it's in this place of abiding presence that I try to bring all my thoughts and feelings into the open and to have the Lord inform my thinking and my feeling so that I might reflect His heart towards others more effectively. Understanding abiding presence starts with you knowing that you are loved and treasured by the Lord. Kind of like discovering a love that you just can't turn away from. And it's from this place of presence that I'm coming to you today to share these thoughts and these encouragements. Without this presence, I'm just offering you more ideas and theories, and that's just not enough to bring your heart to a place of confidence, peace, fulfillment, and hope. Over the past 5 years or so, my wife and I have had the joyful privilege of serving a small group of young adults that have met regularly in our home. And this group brought a lot of personal struggles to our doorstep that we had never dealt with before, at least not at such a deep level. And this whole issue of divorce and remarriage was one of those issues. And that's where we really got our feet wet in learning how to deal with these messy marriage situations up close. We were walking alongside and supporting a single mom in our group on this very journey, and she was struggling with her questions as she was being bombarded by all kinds of mixed messages from all kinds of people in her life, some of them very toxic. And the questions that came up were fantastic questions. Questions like, is divorce the unforgivable sin? Or is divorce even a sin at all? And how about remarriage? Is remarriage after divorce a sin? Or is the option to remarry different for the more guilty spouse as compared to the more innocent spouse? And who's even to decide who's the more guilty spouse in a marriage breakup? Or does that even matter? And how do we treat divorced people who are Christians? Or how are we to think of Christian couples that are in the process of separating? On and on the questions came, and I'm sure you could add your own questions to this list, right? But since that time, my wife and I continue to find ourselves involved in walking alongside and supporting more people who have found themselves in a similar place. Each situation is different, we find, and each one requires a different type of wisdom and a different type of grace to navigate, which always keeps us on our toes and also deep in prayer. So even though it may seem like I'm speaking more to women and to single moms in this series, that's just because most of our experiences have involved women and single moms. Everything that I say here applies equally to both men and women, so just be creative and prayerful as you apply what you hear to your own situation. In no way do I pretend to know how to answer all the possible questions that surround divorce and remarriage, and you might come away with more questions than answers at times, and I'm okay with that. Let those questions percolate with the Lord in abiding presence, and I pray that He will fill you with a joyful anticipation as you discover the path of truth that He has prepared for you. Now, I spend lots of time percolating with the Lord myself, and the Lord has been faithful in guiding our thinking as we continue to support friends in these dark seasons of their lives. I've searched the scriptures as thoroughly as I know how. I've had deep conversations with older and wiser people, and I've brought some heavy questions before the Lord as I've waited patiently to discern the heart of the Father on these matters. And so I will explain the truth of the scriptures as I understand them and in the way that they make the most sense to me, both as I've studied them and as I've put them into practice in real life. I know that there are more experienced Bible teachers out there that understand some of these issues quite differently than I do, and I'm okay with that. I ask you to think carefully about what you hear, to pray about it, and to study this whole matter more deeply for yourself, okay? Don't just believe anything because I say it. Your peace needs to come from your own learning journey and from your own times of wrestling with tough questions as you learn how to apply truth to your own life and to your situations. And I've learned that living out truth confidently in my own life seems to work best when it comes from this place of inner persuasion, I call it. When the Holy Spirit makes something clear for me in a way that I never saw or understood before. It's not just letting someone tape a Bible verse over your questions to suppress them. That's not living in the truth, my friends. The purpose of the Bible is to point us to Jesus, through whose teachings and example we can learn to discern the heart of the Father, so that we will be able to reflect His heart back to the people who are caught in all these dark and broken situations. This is one way that you know that grace is coming alive inside of you, when your attitudes and your actions are reflecting the heart of the Father, even in the messiest of situations. And so let this catchphrase, the heart of the Father, be burned deeply into your heart. You'll hear me use this phrase or something like it over 100 times in this series. And if we elevate any goal in this conversation above our goal to accurately discern the heart of the Father, we will be heading straight for the weeds, and this whole conversation will be a complete waste of our time. Now, I remember the first time that I spoke of the Father's heart in relation to God, and I found out in an unexpected kind of way that not everyone has the same image of God in mind as I do when they hear God referred to as a father. And ever since that wake-up moment, I am very aware that some people who hear anyone talk about the Father's heart might have an unpleasant reaction to that phrase because it will trigger memories of fatherhood that for them are very painful. And I want to acknowledge that pain right from the start. So even though I will continue to use this term in this series, I want to be very sensitive to anyone for whom this fatherhood image of God is not very helpful. And in His teachings, Jesus used the metaphor of a father more than anything else when He spoke of God. The Father, my Father, your Father, our Father. I mean, it's everywhere, right? And what Jesus was trying to convey was the tender love that comes from a caring presence that calls you a beloved child. So if talking about God as a father is a sensitive area for you, I want to extend a special grace to you. There's nothing wrong with you. Having father wounds is not your fault. And thousands of people are struggling with exactly the same thing as you are. But here's a thought I'd ask you to consider. I'd still like you to imagine a tender love in your life that's meaningful for you, that actually touches your heart. Maybe you felt that kind of love from your mom, or from your grandma, or from someone else who has modeled a healthy love for you. Think of that love every time you hear me share thoughts about the tenderness of the Father's heart, okay? Over many months, you might sense the Lord redeeming that disconnect inside of you and maybe even healing some of those father wounds of the past. I've seen this redemptive healing take place in the lives of several young women who struggled incredibly with fatherhood issues. One young mom, for example, who was in the depths of her pain, told me that, "Gary, don't talk to me about God being a good father." And as the Lord worked in this young woman's heart and as we journeyed alongside her, the time came about a year and a half later where she began referring to the Lord as Papa in her life. Can you believe that? I mean, I get teary-eyed just telling you this story. But that's how the redemptive flow of God heals wounded hearts. The Lord pours out a healing grace and a tender love to heal wounds that might otherwise fester for an entire lifetime. And so I want you to experience this redemptive flow in your heart as well, my friends, which is why I'm setting this table so slowly and so carefully. Some of you might be used to hearing any teaching about God done in a rather harsh way, in a way that forces you to believe everything the teacher says, or else, well, you're just wrong. And that's not how the truth of God was ever meant to be conveyed. There is indeed a truth to be known, and his name is Jesus. And as you grow in your personal knowledge of Jesus, and as his ways become part of your natural way of thinking, you will find yourself in this redemptive flow, and the truth will set you free in all kinds of creative ways. There is nothing more persuasive than to see a life lived according to the truth, a life that is informed by the abiding presence of Jesus in our lives. And there's one thing that I've become convinced of after spending several years walking alongside of people on a divorce journey, and it's this thing. God's grace and his compassion and his goodness are far more powerful than the pain and the confusion and the trauma that come with nearly every divorce story. And knowing that, my friends, will inject some serious hope into all aspects of this conversation. So our topic is divorce, remarriage, and the grace of God. And that third part is probably the most important part, learning how to effectively infuse our conversations about divorce with the grace of God. Without grace, we really have nothing to offer the hurting people that find themselves in this dark, dark season of their lives. So if we divorce the grace of God from this whole discussion, we're going to end up in the weeds for sure. The grace of God always brings a healthier balance to our conversations, and it's this foundation of grace that the Apostle Paul was thinking of when he wrote in Colossians 4, verse 6, "Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." Did you catch that? Conversations full of grace, seasoned with salt. And why? So that we will know how to answer everyone. Now, this doesn't mean that we provide neat black and white answers for everyone's problems, but rather that we are genuinely gracious and humble as we respond to others with a gentleness of spirit that reflects this amazing grace that is already transforming our own hearts. That's what this means. And you know what? You will find that grace is the key that opens many doors to meaningful conversations in your life. I have not always practiced this very well myself, and I've sabotaged a few conversations in my time by failing to convey the Lord's grace to people who needed a dose of compassion and grace far more than my pious opinions. And so I'm reminding myself to use that grace salt shaker, should we say, more and more often in my conversations with people. And you know what? The conversations are only getting deeper and sweeter, or should I say saltier? Either way, when people sense grace coming from us in our conversations with them, their hearts often open up and they become more vulnerable, and the conversations become far more real and far more life-changing. And so I want this whole series to carry this aroma of grace. I want our conversations to honor the Lord and to lead each of us to process the truth in the presence of God and to come to peace in how we think about divorce and remarriage. And at the end of the day, I want you to see and to feel the difference that this peace makes in your life in the way that you think about the reality of divorce in your world. And nobody gets to that place of peace without asking themselves some of the deeper heart questions. Questions like, am I in a place where my heart is humbly seeking to know truth and to live out God's truth so that I'm accurately reflecting the heart of the Father in each and every situation? Am I flexible enough to adjust my thinking a little bit? Am I okay if the Lord shows me something that I've never seen before, or do I only have ears to hear what I want to hear? And I once heard a wise person say The greatest roadblock to your own personal growth is what you think you already know. Think about that one. And never has this been more true than when we have conversations about matters of faith that take us outside of our comfort zones. So let's embrace humility as we seek to better know the truth who sets us free. The Lord will be faithful and He will make His ways known to you. But our humility is the key to discovering that life. So my friends, pull out that key, insert it into the lock, and swing that door wide open into a space of freedom that you never thought you'd enjoy in your lifetime. As I've been preparing this series, I've been picturing two main groups of believers in my mind that I'm really wanting to speak life to. And I say believers because my assumption is that I'm speaking to people who are followers of Jesus and who want their lives to honor Him. But within that group of believers, I feel that my heart is especially soft towards those whose marriages are in a meltdown right now. Maybe you're hearing this series as a single mom who's feeling the pain and the confusion of divorce, or maybe you're in a situation where you're afraid that this might be the next season of your life and your heart is torn over what to do. You might be very anxious over what you think lies in your future. You may be someone who has been crushed by the actions of a spouse whose heart has become cold and hard, or you might be living unloved and neglected, or emotionally or physically abused, or there may be some horrible addictions that have destroyed your marriage. Whether you've kept your struggling marriage a secret, or whether you've already divorced and moved on, I really want to speak to those who are struggling to sort out the confusion and the shame that often complicate people's divorce journeys. I want to help you to find encouragement and peace as you process your own marriage struggle with the Lord and with good people that He will bring into your life to help you. Today, you might need to hear that the Lord has not turned His back on you and that you are not stuck alone without hope. It is not the Lord's will for you just to be, nice and quiet and patient in the face of abuse or addictions, or to never take any decisive action to protect your own heart. That's not the heart of the Father for your situation. So if any of this sounds like you, then caring for you and encouraging you is my first priority. The truth of the matter is that sometimes when we are at our lowest point, with confusion and shame clouding our minds, we may need to borrow confidence from those people that God has sent to walk alongside of us, who can see things more clearly because they are outsiders to our situation. So when God sends those kinds of people and they show up in your life, let them speak words of grace over you, okay? Let them pray with you. Let them proclaim the favor of God over you. And you know what? At first, you might not even believe a word of what they're saying to you, or you might even get a bit upset at what you hear. And that's all okay. But I predict that over time, their confidence in the Lord will slowly become your own. So during these difficult seasons, allow trusted people into your life to be your confidence when you don't have any of your own to give. The Lord is with you, my friend, and He is working behind the scenes even when you have no idea what He's up to. And when He's doing stuff like that in my own life, I like to call Him Jehovah Sneaky. And the other group that I want to speak to as well are all those who might have been like me. What do I mean by that? Well, I've had no personal experience with divorce or separation in my own marriage, but I've definitely needed some equipping in order to walk alongside those who are going through exactly that kind of hardship. So maybe you are feeling the nudge to walk alongside someone who is going through a marriage meltdown, and you are wanting some wisdom from the Lord to know how to respond and how to speak grace and truth and encouragement into that dark situation, but you feel like you're in way over your head. You might be thinking to yourself, what do I do? What do I say? How should I even think about all these things? So if you're anything like I was, I want this series to help you transform your confusion into confidence so that you will be more effective as a support person if and when that time should come for you. Because the truth of the matter is that your gentle spirit and your calm confidence in the Lord is what other hurting people will sense in you, and that's what they're going to lean on in their darkest days. It's not going to be all the wise things that you speak that will bring healing as much as the way that you make people feel when they are with you. Because experience has shown that people may not remember much of what you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I know of no more powerful way to put this into practice than to bring the presence of the Lord into a painful and messy situation, And then just to allow the aroma of Christ that you've been soaking in to do its work. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 2:15 that we are to God the sweet aroma of Christ among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. And you know what? Those whose lives are being crushed by a marriage meltdown, those poor souls are perishing. And the sweet aroma of Christ's compassion and grace can literally be the lifeline that changes everything for them. There's also a wise saying that I like that says that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I'm sure you can see how that speaks to having the Father's heart of compassion flowing through us. Now, I know what it's like to feel unqualified to help anybody in these matters, okay? It can feel like you're in way over your head, right? And one thing that helped me a lot was hearing a wise man say that in situations where you want to be obedient to the Lord's nudges in your life, being willing to do what you don't feel qualified to do, that's exactly what qualifies you. Now, that for me was incredibly powerful and freeing, and I still think of that a lot to this day. I found some good questions that helped to remind me of what's most important in terms of us being qualified by the Lord. And so sometimes I ask myself, do I really know the heart of the Father for the broken people caught in this situation? Do I rely on the equipping of the Holy Spirit as I walk alongside people who are going through a tough marriage situation without me getting all caught up in the emotions of it all? Or am I willing to allow others to discern the heart of God for themselves without me being driven by my need to tell them what to do all the time? Or to what degree is my own experience and abiding presence releasing the aroma of Christ into the lives of people around me? I think these questions are a good starting point for you to help you prepare your heart to bring this healing aroma of the presence of God into the lives of broken and crushed people. Maybe let me leave you with this encouragement in terms of how qualified you may or may not be feeling right now. If your soul has been informed by abiding presence, and if it's in your heart to love people well, you're probably more qualified than you think. Now I'd like to highlight 3 things that commonly derail conversations about divorce and remarriage among believers. And these are some of the pitfalls that I want us to avoid in our conversations together. So here are 3 that I picked out of my own experience, and I present them to you in no particular order, okay? The first thing that I found that derails this conversation is the need to oversimplify this issue and to judge all divorce and remarriage situations with a few rules. Too much teaching has reduced this whole area to 2 or 3 so-called biblical rules. And just apply these few rules to everybody and then the matter is settled. The problem goes away. I've heard this over and over again. And whether this stems from ignorance or from a desperate need for black and white certainty or from a misunderstanding of God's grace, some people just seem compelled to reduce complicated issues like divorce and remarriage to a tidy package of a few rules wrapped up with a couple of Bible verses. But the fact of the matter is that most cases of divorce are very complex, and there are usually many layers of history, hurts, and emotions at play. And these layers all kind of change as the journey unfolds. And as a community of believers in Jesus, we haven't always handled this hot potato issue very well either. We've often taken a very short-sighted and a simplified view of this issue, dishing out judgment and pat answers, cloaked with a few scriptures, of course, which has only added unnecessarily to people's pain. And this graceless approach will always derail our conversations every single time. We'll have a much more Christ-like flavor in our lives if we make our priority knowing the Father's heart rather than trying to get a bulletproof belief system together that is tied together with a few biblical proof texts. And the second thing that derails conversations about divorce and remarriage is when silence becomes the golden rule. So even though in some circles people may be very vocal about their positions on divorce, other groups of people deal with their awkward feelings regarding divorce by not allowing it to be spoken about at all. So silence becomes the golden rule. And as you can imagine, this type of silence is not healthy at all, and it can be especially devastating for someone on a divorce journey who needs real conversation and tender grace and supportive guidance in this area of their lives. But if silence is the golden rule, then the fear and the shame of people's condemning and graceless reactions will keep these hurting spouses from speaking up and from seeking the help that they so desperately need. Maybe another way of saying the same thing would be to say that There's a shortage of safe places for people to go to ask their questions and to really be heard. And I'm talking about safe places within our own faith communities. And so in this series, our conversations will not be derailed by silence on this subject. I want us to grow in our desire and in our ability to be that safe person for hurting people to go and talk to. And I think that if we know anything at all about the example of Jesus, he was this first and foremost. I mean, the hurting and the broken were drawn to him by the hundreds, while the self-righteous and the so-called religious professionals, they were offended by his many expressions of grace and compassion, right? And you know, shunning divorced people into silence is a sure sign that the priority of showing the Father's heart has been completely abandoned. And the third thing that derails many conversations about divorce and remarriage is fear. Now, I know there can be many aspects to this fear, but the one that I want to highlight for us is the fear that keeps believers from showing grace to people in tough marriage situations because they are afraid that showing people, quote unquote, too much grace will cause people to look for loopholes to use divorce as an easy way out. This is a very real fear out there. And from what I've seen in real life as we've helped people, this fear-based excuse doesn't actually ever play out. Because you know what? Those who have it in their hearts to use divorce as this so-called easy out, they're going to do that whether you show them grace or not. And on top of that, this fear completely misses the point of how God's grace works in the human heart. Grace always works to redeem the big picture and to restore the stamp of the divine image in our lives. And grace invites us to feel safe enough in God's presence, to look deeply within ourselves, and to invite the Lord into those broken places without us experiencing any shame at all. Grace is that healing presence that loves us before anything is fixed. And it is grace that teaches us that we are loved and that we will never be abandoned by the one who matters most. So if you've been struggling to give people grace because of, some kind of fear that they're going to use divorce as an easy way out, I would ask you to rethink your understanding of grace and of the Father's heart as this whole series unfolds. Maybe ponder the life of Jesus and see how much of that fear stopped him from pouring out unreasonable amounts of grace into broken lives. I think you already know what you're going to find, don't you? The fact of the matter is that people do not harden their hearts when they are immersed in grace. It's shame that causes that type of hardening. Shame is really fear's older brother, you might say. And we will harden our hearts when we are consumed with our own shame, not when grace lands softly in our hearts. And so, our thinking is sadly misguided if we think that grace will have the effect of leading anyone deeper into darkness. And those who would withhold this healing grace from hurting people because they are afraid that they will only enable more so-called sin in their lives, those people are clearly not understanding the heart of the Father or the nature of true grace. And besides, keep this in mind, you are ultimately not responsible for what people do with the grace that you show them. You are, however, responsible for the grace that you withhold. So I've shared all these introductory thoughts with you so that you will understand that this series is not about us uncovering a few cool Bible strategies so that we can have some neat and simple answers to debate all the complicated issues surrounding separation, divorce, and remarriage. I want you to get the sense that this whole series is far more about you preparing your heart to be that safe, grace-filled person who has experienced enough of the presence of God to bring the aroma of that presence with you as you walk alongside of those who are enduring the trauma of divorce. And if you're the one enduring the trauma of divorce yourself, I hope that this whole series hits you like a huge soft pillow, giving you a place where you can land safely, where you can feel understood, and where you can process your own situation from a whole new angle. The pain of divorce really is heartbreaking, and the judgment that often follows, even from other believers, only serves to drive more wedges between people and to cause hurting people to isolate themselves even further. I've seen single moms who have been criticized and disowned by their own parents. I've watched people judge and emotionally abandon their own family members when they needed love and support the most. And many other people, women especially, have been Bible bombed with verses that were intended to shame them into staying in unhealthy and unsafe relationships that were endangering them and their kids, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically. And this kind of treatment clearly does not reflect the heart of the Father. Pretending to speak on behalf of God with these types of attitudes is a blatant form of spiritual abuse for which we will have to give an account one day. So my friends, we need to talk, and we need to learn how to bring some new grace salt shakers to this table, so to speak, so that we can participate in people's struggles more confidently without us getting all derailed with wonky emotions and with bad theology. All of our views need to be held with humility and with a willingness to change and to grow as we get a better understanding of how Jesus reveals the true nature of the Father's heart. And so as you get a stronger sense of the Father's heart beating inside of you, these important conversations that need to be salted with grace, they'll probably almost fall into place almost by themselves. Because if your heart has been captured by the Lord, and if you've been experiencing tenderness and intimacy with Him, living in this abiding presence, then this whole conversation will probably flow quite naturally for you. And so, as we land this plane for today, what thoughts and feelings are you bringing to this table that is being set before us? If you're in the middle of a marriage meltdown, and if you're feeling overwhelmed with confusion and pain and questions because of what you're up against, well, please pull up a chair at the head of this table. You are our honored guest today. Our conversation here will be raw and real, and it will not be derailed by the things that so often derail these conversations. This table is a shame-free, all-you-can-eat place where you will feast on appetizers of grace, main courses of goodness and favor, followed by desserts of sweet, abiding presence. I look forward to continuing this conversation in part 2. See you there.